I'm going to talk about the different horizons and timeframes that we're working on with SaaS marketing. And this is going to dispel a lot of the confusion and a lot of the debates that are happening about things such as should we be focusing on brand awareness or should we just be focusing on demand generation? So in the short term, so this is when you're a bootstrap startup, you don't have a lot of funding, and you don't even know if you're going to be around in the next year or two. What you're really focused on is the short term. So in the short term, your sole focus pretty much is the income statement because you need revenue coming in, you need profit coming in just to sustain your own existence. Because if you can't pay the bills, then there's no point in investing in things that aren't going to pay dividends until 5 years, 10 years into the future. So this is where demand generation is the focus. And that's a problem for a lot of startup businesses is because they get excited about these great ideas like content marketing, brand building. But in reality, if they don't have a lot of funding, they just can't afford to do it. They're really concerned with, can I get revenue in the next 3 months? So that's why demand generation is so important when you're a small business. And often what happens with early startups is they don't put enough weight on demand generation, and the marketers that they hire don't have a sophisticated understanding of demand generation because they're used to running more brand campaign centric, more holistic approaches to marketing. All right, so another mistake that happens in the early stage is low risk tolerance. So people don't want to try things because they're scared their reputation's going to get ruined, or they're scared of offending people or getting something wrong. But really, you have nothing to lose when you're small. You have no reputation. If you do something wrong, people are going to forget about you. They won't even remember that you did something because they don't even know your brand. They don't know your company. So you should be taking a high risk approach. You should be trying different things, and you should have a lot of agility when you approach those. The other mistake that people make is they aren't focused on in-market customers. So in-market customers are those that are ready to buy. These are the people that are actively searching on Google searches saying, how do I buy a software that solves this problem? Or they're asking on Reddit and Quora, like, does anyone know if there's a solution for this? These are people that, they have their wallets open, they're ready to make a purchase. Now, the measure of success in the short term is really return on investment. So this is, I'm going to put this much money into Google Ads, into Facebook ads, into email automation software. How much money am I going to get out of it? Okay, so it's really hard financial metrics like return on investment, short-term thinking in terms of KPIs. So success often in the short term is really driven by a VP of demand generation. You don't actually have a head of marketing. You pretty much just have a head of demand generation. So feeding the pipeline of sales to the sales team. Now, this completely changes in the long term. And there's an inflection point. Some people like Jason Lemkin say it's around 10 million ARR. Kind of depends on what you're dealing with. Are you in enterprise sales, or are you mid-market sales? Are you direct to consumer? Then that inflection point may be a little bit earlier. So here, what we're really focused on is the balance sheet. So if we think about investors like Bruce Greenwald or Warren Buffett, when they value companies, they start by looking at the balance sheet and they say, okay, what is the value of the assets? Let's subtract the liabilities. And that's the core value of the company. Now, on top of that, there's income coming in. That's great. There's also growth. That's great. But really, the bulk is the book value. So it's the assets. Now, what are we concerned with here? It's less about demand generation. It's about asset management, right? You actually have assets now. You've been around for a while. You've built up equity. You have a brand that is worth protecting, that has a reputation that needs to be sustained. You've built up communities. You've built up proprietary content. Perhaps you've built up an annual event. You own the event for your industry. So these are assets that need to be managed. Whereas earlier, you really had no assets. You're starting out, it's just about income coming in. Now, you can take a portion of that and start investing it, but in the short term, you aren't managing anything because you don't have anything. Now, a mistake that companies make is when they get large, they're still stuck in the mindset of demand generation. What is the pipeline coming in the next 2-3 months, this quarter, this half year? But really, that's too short-term thinking. Now you should be thinking in terms of large assets and thinking more in terms of a longer time horizon. The opposite problem happens with short-term companies. They get a little too excited about building the brand, and they're not looking at the income statement enough. So as you get larger, now you have a lower risk tolerance, right? People are more likely to sue you because you have money to lose. And if they sue, they'll actually get something. You also have a brand reputation that needs to be protected. The workforce is larger now, so it becomes more politicized. So now you're getting more conservative in how you're approaching your marketing. You can't just do random agile experiments. You probably have a more solidified strategy that you need to adhere to more strictly and in a more disciplined nature. So the other thing that you're doing is you're focusing more on out-of-market customers. So instead of only focusing on those that have high purchase intent, that are actively searching for a solution, now you're going after not just the early adopters, but also people where, okay, maybe they don't have a need right now, but with enough brand reputation sustained in the market, they will come to you as the default solution when that need arises. Or because you're so popular, they're actually thinking, hey, maybe this is something that would help us, even though I don't have a red hot pain to address right now. So instead of return on investment, what you're really thinking of is in terms of equity. Am I building the value of the company? Am I building the value of the brand? And am I going to get a return on asset when I make these investments and grow the assets that we already have? You're thinking in terms of things like brand awareness. You're thinking in terms of access, share of voice. So your KPIs start to shift. Now, in business to business, not enough people make this transition. They're still stuck in this short-term thinking, and that's why they grow very slowly and marginally, because they're being very safe and protective. Now, the other thing that we see is that as you start to approach this, tens of millions in revenue as a SaaS company, now you start to think in terms of, we need a chief marketing officer. We need somebody to manage the new roles that are emerging at this stage, which is product marketing managers, brand marketing managers, people more dedicated to content. So people that are more oriented around managing assets rather than just generating short-term advertising revenue, short-term marketing communications revenue. So these are the major two stages that you're dealing with. Now, I actually think the secret magic happens in the middle. And in the middle, what you're doing is you're not 100% focused on the income statement, but you're also not 100% focused on the balance sheet. You're focused on things that are kind of midterm investments. And this is something that I'm hugely biased towards. This is the midterm. So these are things like large contracts, partnerships. So partnerships take different forms. It may be an exclusive contract that you have with whatever the core piece of software is in your industry. So that might be a practice management system. It might be the ERP. It might be the accounting system. It might be the CRM. Usually SaaS exists in these ecosystems. And at the nexus of that ecosystem is one of these major pieces of software. So ideally, you want to get a partnership with whatever that main piece of software is. Now, that's not the only partnership you could have. You can have partnerships with companies that are the same size as you. You can do things like co-marketing, or you could do an annual research report with that company. You can also work with smaller partners, so influencers, web designers, accountants, lawyers, people that have a lot of clout with your target customers. Partnerships can also be with large social media people that influence your target customers. So these are things where, okay, you may not get results in 3 months, but you're probably going to get them this year. or maybe after 6 months of investing time in it. So you're concerned with investments, kind of midterm investments. The other thing you can start looking at is virality. So things that don't necessarily have a linear payoff, like Google pay-per-click ads, but a viral video or a sharing program, an affiliate program, things that can generate exponential returns. They may not necessarily, because you're going to need to experiment, but it could have a higher payoff than those kind of surefire ROI campaigns. Okay, so we looked at the short term, the long term, and then my favorite space, which is this midterm. And there's another area, which is the far future. Now, the far future is generally not something you're looking at unless you have tons of venture capital or you're a large established company that's been around for a while. So this is where thought leadership becomes more important. Now, a lot of marketers get a little too focused on thought leadership way too early. And I think this is because companies like HubSpot tell you inbound marketing is the answer to everything. The problem with inbound marketing is that it takes tons of time to build momentum with things like content, large pieces of content, large pieces of thought leadership. And don't get me wrong, I use HubSpot. I love HubSpot. I think the customer support is amazing, very exceptional. But you shouldn't be too biased towards thought leadership because often it's oriented towards that far future stage. And unless you're dealing with some pieces of content which are more kind of midterm, long-term focused, like maybe proprietary research report or a webinar, SEO focused content. Okay, so in the far future, we're also concerned with research and development. We're concerned with projects that shoot for the moon, things that could 100x the business, but we're not sure because there are a lot of unknowns when you're dealing with the far future. The other thing that you're looking at is emerging technology and emerging markets. So things that are on the periphery that could be highly profitable, but there is a lot of uncertainty there, and it does require some investment now in order to reap those profits in the future. But if you're a small company, you don't have a lot of funding, you just can't afford to operate in this space at all.